It was the kind of set a comedian spends the rest of his life trying to forget. A small club on a slow night, maybe 40 people scattered across a room built for 200. The chairs that were empty seemed louder than the people who had shown up. On stage stood a young man in a suit, a little too bright for the room, a microphone in his hand, and the whole night collapsing around him. His name was Katt Williams. He was years away from the flashy suits, the arenas, the specials people would quote for decades. On this night, he was just another hungry comic on an early slot, and he was dying. Every joke he threw landed in silence. Not the angry silence of a crowd that hates you. Something worse. The polite, patient silence of a room waiting for you to be done. He could hear his own voice bouncing off the back wall. He could hear a glass being set down at the bar, and there, in the darkness, at the back of that half-empty room, one man was watching every second of it. A man whose name was already known across the country. A man Katt Williams idolized. Cedric the Entertainer. Katt Williams did not know he was there. If he had, it might have broken him completely. But what Cedric the Entertainer did after that set, in a narrow hallway nobody ever filmed, would follow Katt Williams for the rest of his life. To understand why, you have to understand what it means to fail in a room like that, and who Katt Williams was before anyone ever knew his name. Before the world knew Katt Williams, there was just a young man who wanted this more than he wanted almost anything. He had come up hard. He had learned early that nothing was going to be handed to him. Comedy was not a hobby for him. It was a way out, a way up, the one thing that felt like it might be his. So he worked. He wrote constantly, filling pages, testing lines under his breath, watching the greats and studying how they built a laugh from nothing. He drove to open mics that paid him nothing. He performed for rooms of 4 people and rooms of 40, treating each one like it mattered, because to him, it did. He believed, the way only a young artist can believe, that if he was just good enough, just relentless enough, the world would eventually have to make room for him. But belief is a fragile thing when the laughs stop coming. And on this night, the laughs had stopped coming. Standing in that harsh light, watching 40 people check their watches, a terrible question crept into the back of his mind. What if he was wrong about himself? What if all the hunger, all the work, all the miles added up to a man in a bright suit dying in an empty room? Every comedian meets that question eventually. For most, it comes on a night exactly like this one. Katt Williams finished his set to the sound of his own footsteps. No applause worth the name. Just the scrape of the microphone going back into its stand. And the longest walk of his young life. Off that stage and toward the dark. Every comedian who ever became somebody has a room like this in their past. A room that almost ended them. In the 90s, the clubs that built the great ones were not glamorous. They were narrow, smoky places with sticky floors and a 2-drink minimum, tucked into strip malls and side streets in cities all over the country. The stage lights were harsh. The sound system crackled. The green room, if you could call it that, was often just a storage closet with a folding chair and a cracked mirror. This was the proving ground. This was where you found out if you had it or if you only thought you did. The bookers did not care about your dreams. The crowds did not owe you a single laugh. You walked up those 3 little steps to the stage completely alone, and for the next few minutes, The entire world was that microphone and the silence you were trying to fill. Most people who tried it quit. They quit after one bad night like this one. A room too empty, a crowd too cold, jokes that had worked 100 times suddenly falling dead on the floor. A single night like that can convince a young comic that the whole dream was a lie. That everyone who ever laughed before was just being kind. And on this particular night, in this particular room, that is exactly the cliff Katt Williams was standing on. He did not know it yet, but he was minutes away from the moment that decides everything. The moment a person either walks away from comedy forever or finds a reason to climb those 3 little steps one more time. The walk off a stage after a set like that is its own kind of punishment. Katt Williams moved through the narrow doorway beside the stage, past the crackling speaker, into the dim little hallway that led to the storage closet green room. His shirt was damp. His ears were ringing with silence. His hands, he would remember later, would not stop shaking. In moments like this, a young comedian does not think about next week. He thinks about all of it. Every mile, every night away, every person who told him to get a real job, every reason to believe those people had been right all along. He leaned against the cold wall in that hallway, alone, and for a moment he let himself feel the full weight of it. The thought was simple and total. Maybe I am not good enough. Maybe I never was. He may have been closer to quitting in that hallway than he had ever been in his life. Not quitting for the night, quitting for good. Because that is how it happens. It is never a grand decision. It is a young man alone against a wall, deciding that the hurt is bigger than the dream. He did not hear the footsteps at first. He was too far inside his own head, too busy dismantling everything he thought he was. Then a shadow fell across the dim hallway light. Katt Williams looked up, and standing in front of him, unmistakable, was the last man on earth he wanted to see him like this. Cedric the entertainer. A man he idolized, who had just watched him fall apart in front of a nearly empty room. Now here is the part that made this night different from every other bad night. Cedric the entertainer was in the room, and to understand what that means, you have to understand who Cedric the entertainer already was. By this point, Cedric was not a hopeful. He was an arrival. Warm, commanding, beloved, a man who could walk onto any stage in America and own it inside of 10 seconds. He was on his way to becoming one of the kings of comedy, part of a group that would show the entire country that a stand-up could fill an arena and still feel like he was talking to you alone. He had headlined the rooms young comics only dreamed about. Comedians like Katt Williams did not just admire a man like Cedric the entertainer. They studied him. They wanted to be him. And on this night, for reasons of his own, Cedric had come through this small club quietly, sitting in the back, watching the early acts the way veterans sometimes do, remembering their own hungry years. He had seen 1,000 young comics. He had seen the ones who had it and the ones who only wanted it. And he had just watched a young man in a bright suit die on stage in front of 40 people. Most established stars would have finished their drink and left. A bad set is a private humiliation. The kindest thing, most people would say, is to look away and let a man have his failure in peace. But Cedric the entertainer did not look away. He stood up, and he walked toward the hallway where a devastated young comedian was about to disappear into the dark. Something changed in that hallway that no camera ever caught. It was not a spotlight moment. There was no applause, no crowd, no proof it had ever happened at all, except in the memory of two men. But for Katt Williams, it was one of the most important moments of his entire life. Because a great comedian had looked at him on his worst night, seen past the empty room and the dead jokes and the shaking hands, and told him the truth that a young artist needs more than anything. Not that he was already great, but that he had the thing that could become great if he refused to quit. Katt Williams did not walk away from comedy that night. He drove home carrying two words, rough room, and a promise he made quietly to himself in the dark. He would show up again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the year after that. He went back to the empty rooms and the cold crowds and the harsh lights, and this time, when a night went badly, he did not hear a verdict. He heard Cedric the entertainer. The room does not tell you who you are. It only tells you who shows up again tomorrow. And Katt Williams kept showing up. For years, through every rough room comedy could throw at him, until one day the rooms stopped being empty, until the flashy suits and the arenas and the specials came, and the whole country finally learned the name of the young man who had almost quit in a hallway. He became one of the sharpest voices of his generation, but the man who kept him in the game that night never once took credit for it. For a long second, neither of them said anything. Katt Williams braced for it. He was sure he knew what was coming. A word of pity, maybe, or worse, advice. The gentle, terrible kind that really means you should think about doing something else. He had built a wall around himself in that hallway, and he waited for the older man to knock it down. But Cedric the entertainer did not offer pity. He did not offer a lecture. He looked at the young man against the wall, at the damp shirt and the shaking hands, and the eyes full of everything Katt Williams was trying not to show, and the first thing he did was smile. Not a mocking smile, a knowing one. The smile of a man who had stood in that exact hallway himself more than once, a long time ago. Rough room, he said. Just that. Rough room. And in those two words was something Katt Williams had not felt all night. Recognition. Cedric the entertainer was not telling him it was fine. He was telling him it was normal. That the great ones had all died in rooms exactly like this one. That the empty chairs and the cold silence were not a verdict on his talent. They were a rite of passage. Then Cedric the entertainer said the thing that Katt Williams would carry for the rest of his life. The room does not tell you who you are, he said. It only tells you who shows up again tomorrow. He let that sit in the dim hallway for a moment. Then he said the last part, quiet and certain. I have seen a lot of guys have a great night and disappear. The ones who make it are the ones who can survive a night like this one. And then he added the words that changed everything. I would not have stopped to talk to you if I did not already see it.
Years later, when Katt Williams was filling the very kind of rooms that Cedric the Entertainer once filled, people would ask him about the secret. How do you stand in front of thousands of people and never seem afraid? How do you survive a bad night without letting it break you? The honest answer went back to a hallway almost no one knew about. To 40 empty chairs and a set that died, and a shadow falling across a dim light. To 2 words from a man he idolized:
Rough room. Because what Cedric the Entertainer gave him that night was not a joke or a bit or a piece of technique. It was permission to fail without disappearing. It was the understanding that the worst night of your life is not the end of your story unless you decide to let it be. The great ones are not the ones who never bomb. They are the ones who climb the 3 little steps one more time after they do. Katt Williams learned that in a hallway from a man who chose kindness on a night when looking away would have been so much easier. And maybe that is the part worth holding on to. Somewhere in your own life, there was probably a room that almost broke you. A night you were sure you were not good enough. Most of the time, no one walks up to remind you that showing up tomorrow is the whole game. Katt Williams was lucky. On his worst night, someone did. And every time he stood in a silence and let a crowd wait, some part of him was still that young man in the bright suit, finally understanding that the room never got to decide who he was. Only he did. And now, so do you.